So, Phil, that was really fascinating for me. I mean, I had some familiarity with transpersonal psychology and parapsychology and all that, but obviously, this gentleman is at the forefront of that research and has been for years, and really some fascinating stuff.
Yeah, he's always been at the heart of that kind of research, and he's held up very well to all the kind of opposition and even attacks from people for even daring to take parapsychology and altered states seriously. But he managed and had a distinguished career in the University of California academic system. So he obviously has handled it well. We
It,
should do some more like this. There are people doing research on the effect of prayer on people's health and
right.
all kinds of stuff.
And for those listening in, if you have any ideas for people to interview, please, by all means, give us those suggestions. Spiritmatterstalk.com, and you can get in touch with us. It's also very interesting to me, Phil. Science is supposed to be very objective, and science is really just a method for gaining knowledge. But when you talk about applying solid science to certain things, like what he's doing, people get up in arms in the scientific community, and maybe
Yeah.
some people in the religious communities as well. But you wonder, objectivity seems to go right out the window. Everybody has their limitations on where they're willing to be scientific or objective.
I know it's a fascinating thing because the spirit of science would lead you to think, well, there's a certain number of people seem to have these experiences. Why do we automatically assume it's just some brain derangement or some fleeting neurological phenomenon when it their own description of it would seem that there may be more to it.
Right. Well, I have a
And
theory on it. Yeah, go ahead.
and so you would think that they would take it at least as a hypothesis worth investigating, but they just dismiss it because it can't be true. So that's where he was distinguishing between the spirit of science and an ideology that they call scientism, where it becomes a belief system as opposed to a method of inquiry.
Right. My feeling is the reason people are fearful or challenge what he's doing is I think that they're afraid it's going to change or discredit their deep fundamental religious, spiritual, whatever beliefs that they have that they feel very comfortable with. And when you
Yeah.
start delving in that area, I mean, let's face it, religions have led to a lot of warfare. And I think when people feel threatened on that fundamental level of their beliefs, they go a little crazy. And so here we're
Yeah.
talking about using scientific methodology to actually look at some of these experiences. Say, there's a miracle. Somebody has in Catholicism, they talk about miracles. What if you could go in and look at it scientifically and the neurophysiology of it and all? Some people would be very open to that. Other people would feel very threatened by that, I think.
Yeah, and I'll bet we didn't ask Charlie this, but I'll bet he's had resistance and blowback, not just from scientists for whom his kind of work would seem to be almost sort of antithetical to their assumptions
Right.
about material reality. But he's probably gotten it from religious people too, who think that psychic experiences, transcendent experiences, and so forth, might take a person into the realm of the demonic and open them up to spirit. Uh, um, Forces that may not be friendly,
Right.
or just lead them away from the true path of Jesus or something.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. It's funny though. I think the two groups that would be interested are the military, because if they could gain any advantage by telepathy or whatever, they're into it. And also, I'm sure there's people. I know this that there are people that trade stocks that are always looking into, a greater psychic abilities
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, and so are open to those possibilities. But I
And
give him a lot of
homicide.
credit because he's a real scientist. he's a real academic, and I think he's approaching it in a real, objective scientific way. And he's obviously gotten a lot of heat for it over the years.
Yeah, and the other group that tends to use this kind of stuff are police forces when they're stumped.
Right.
They'll call, they have
Missing
psychics.
person.
They call them. I remember back in the 60s, there was a book or two about psychic research behind the Iron Curtain.
I remember that.
So the Soviets were taking psychic research quite seriously at a certain point, and they probably thought it would have, military and geopolitical advantage to learn about these abilities that some people have or that might be cultivated. And
Right.
It wouldn't shock me to find out, the CIA was, doing a lot of it to counteract whatever the Soviets
Right.
were.
I'm sure there was a movie made about this sort of stuff. So the U.S. military, did delve into this type of research. And by the way, I think one person that sort of hurt research in this area was, if I remember correctly, his name was Yuri Geller, and he claimed to be a psychic, whereas in fact he was more of a magician and more of sort of like the amazing Karnak. And magicians can do this sort of stuff, but there's a lot of legitimate stuff that takes place. And I was very impressed.
Years and years ago, there was an institute at Duke University devoted to it. I forget, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he was very famous. He started this Institute for Psychic Research, and a lot of good science came out of it. And I don't know what came of it subsequently, but yeah. So and also don't forget during the early 60s, late 50s even, the CIA was doing research on psychedelics.
Right. As a matter of fact, on my radio show, I had on Dr. Bausis, who I think I mentioned to you, Phil. One of his favorite books is your book, American Veda, and another gentleman, and at New York University and Johns Hopkins. After 40 years, they're doing research on psychedelic drugs again for clinical purposes, working with cancer patients, advanced cancer patients, working with people that have addictions to tobacco, to alcohol, whatnot. And they're coming up with some very interesting results. So it's I think there's an openness to it again.
Yeah, I just Googled, by the way, while we were talking the Duke thing. It was Joseph Rhine, Rhine, and he started it, and it's actually apparently still going. It's called the Rhine Rhine Research, Institute for Parapsychology. So it's evidently still going on. I think he's long gone.
I think a lot of folks. One of the things that hurts it, there's a lot of folks that probably strong academic people that would like to do research in this area, but don't want to be labeled oddballs, or haven't heard anything else that they might be interested in. So I think that's unfortunate.
Right. And they probably have a lot of difficulty getting funding.
Yeah, and also I'm reading here, Stanford University has many claims to fame when it comes to paranormal research. For starters, the esteemed university can rightfully assert itself as the first academic institution in the United States to study extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. So I think that there'll be more and more research in this area. They may come up with results, they may not come up with results, but certainly it's something that should be looked at very vigorously and in a strong scientific way.
And what's interesting about Charles's work is that he has a very broad view and grounded in genuine spirituality. So it's not just, isn't this cool?
Right.
The mind can do certain tricks. People who have a different perspective, they look at these studies, and the implications of the studies are very exciting to them, because they imply that there may be more to us than just the brain. There may be more to what the mind is capable of than just the usual rational thought and processing of data. And so there tends to be kind of implications to this, and maybe that's why it scares people.
Right. I do think that things are changing, as he pointed out, and as we know, meditation, research on meditation is much, much more widely accepted now than it would have been, like, 40 years ago, even 30, 20 years ago. And he talked about after-death experiences, which people very openly speak about now. And I think one of the reasons, for instance, after-death experiences became available and taken seriously for research was because, as it was discussed, more and more people came forward and said, "Hey, I actually have had that experience. Somebody in my family has had that experience," and I think more and more people come forward and say, "Look, it's like people are afraid to say they see UFOs. They don't want to be considered crackpots, but a lot of people have had what might be considered psychic experiences, and if enough people have those experiences, it's got to be looked at. There must be something there."
Yeah, and you would think the preponderance of evidence with people's reporting of having these experiences over the course of many decades now, you would think the preponderance of evidence would lead people to at least take experiments seriously and try to design them. And we're much more capable now of doing this kind of research with the kind of methods that we now have for looking into the brain. I remember, when the first research on TM was done, I mean, it probably seemed very crude now. The EEG studies, were relatively primitive, but now, people can do these imaging processes where you see what's going on in the brain in great detail. So
yeah, I remember, was it 71, 72, Scientific American? There was an article about Herbert Benson from Harvard doing research on TM and actually finding results in terms of people's physiology changing during the meditation. So I think nobody would be surprised by that now. And
no,
I think, a lot more is being done and will be done. So
yeah,
fascinating stuff.
that's all true. And so why not bring in the kind of research people like Charlie-Tart were doing, and the Rhine people and the people at Stanford who were doing things like experiments with remote viewing and that sort of thing. Those would seem to be supplementary to the physiological data that people are gathering.
Hmm. Great. Well, Phil, a great guest, a contact of
Yeah.
yours. I look forward to having him come back on. This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with Phil Goldberg and our podcast, spiritmatterstalk.com. Great stuff. And if anybody out there has any suggestions for other folks doing research in this area, or anything else that, for that matter, you find interesting, please contact us and let us know.
Okay.
Till next time.
Great to do it again, Dennis. See
Right.
you next time.